We've had a string of kind of, I told you I'd just seen in the tube stations every time I walk through, the Vitality adverts for health insurance. You can get a free Alexa, there's the free wristbands, the wearable tech. What are these gadgets actually able to pick up about us? I mean, what does preemptive mean?
Well, they can pick up probably everything about us, from our heart rate, our breathing. They tell us to breathe, which I always find really funny. They tell us how quickly to walk. They tell us, they order us. So they're listening to us. They're listening and they're learning, and then they're ordering us around. So I find it quite both funny and terrifying when you see young children coming up to you and going, how many steps have you taken today? And I'm going, oh. You know, it's already built into their understanding and surveillance of themselves. So for me, it's, first of all, I think allowing preemptive capture objects into your home is extraordinarily stupid. They're listening for you. They're trying to learn everything about you so that they can basically target you with advertising more effectively. And again, done in the name of convenience. So that's the object. But it's the things that we wear that are really much more dangerous, because they're picking up our basic bodily rhythms, and they are combined with other data and sold to health insurance companies. They will be sold to medical companies. Now, in the US, we see that very explicitly. But in the UK, this is going to be significant in the future. So will people receive medical treatment if they are known not to move during the day? You know, they will be forced to do exercise. There's one council that's already issuing free Fitbits to people, and we want to know how is that used in the future if they have to make cuts in healthcare or even social care. You know, if you've had a life or a sedentary life where you haven't done the self-care that's necessary for the responsible individual, what happens when you age? Will you get care? So I think there's really significant impacts in these sort of objects. Now, employers know that, and that's why they use them. So that's the real issue.
This leads us on to Jeff Bezos and Amazon.
Yeah.
Just a few months ago, he patented the wristband that will track workers, even though many of his workers are on food stamps, not getting a living wage. Yeah. He's the richest guy on earth. They're wearing surveillance.
I know.
Techniques.
Yeah.
So he's also going to perhaps start a healthcare company with Warren Buffett and JP Morgan. Yeah,
I know. It's extraordinary. When you start putting the links together. And then also he's hailed, I think because they don't wear suits a lot of the time and they were young when they began, they're kind of hailed as these radical innovators where actually the most effective controllers of workers we've ever seen. I don't know if you remember, there was the really famous work control man called F.W. Taylor, and he used to go into factories. Ford loved him. He used to go into factories and monitor everybody's behaviour to try to increase the work rate and reduce wages as a result. And that was it's always been part of management science. It's always been part of how workers get regulated. But now they don't need, a band of sociologists going in to measure workers. You wear the object. Because Amazon workers also have trackers around their ankles. So they're going to have one round their ankle, one on their wrist, and likely one round here doing the heartbeat and everything else. And he's got one now that will tell the hand to move differently to make it more efficient.
Wow.
So for me, it's like our bodies will be reshaped by the technology that's ordering us around, telling us how to do things. Now, it could be good, saying breathe. But that's a watch telling you to breathe or whatever, So
it'll be in line with the company's profits, right? It will
absolutely.
Be in line with what's the most efficient.
Yeah, and then they set up a health insurance company and, make sure that the people who have bad breathing, whose hands don't move efficiently enough, will also have to pay a lot more. And it also has massive impacts. Think about this in terms of persons with disabilities. Mm-hmm. They are already vulnerable. What's going to happen? Because they can't suddenly make their hands move more quickly. What happens if their, eyesight isn't quick enough? What happens if their keyboard use isn't fast enough? So what it means is we're going to have workers who are only like fit and prime and then can just be disregarded. What happens to them? So for me, this has huge implications for the shape of the workforce and the structure of the workforce, because if people only want the fittest, fastest, most versatile and mobile people, what does that mean about the rest of people? And how will they live? Especially if they can't get health insurance.
I mean, just on the health insurance point, have you read Cathy O'Neill's?
Yeah, I love that book.
Fantastic book.
I love it.
She wrote a piece not so long ago that was talking about big data in healthcare, and she was saying basically all the data that they're going to get from all these gadgets means that obviously the sickest people will pay the most,
exactly.
the fittest people will pay the least, and that's not a working health insurance system. She also suggested that obviously something like the NHS would be the only way out of that.
Yeah, and look what's happening to that.
Yeah.
And look at the data systems that we used. Remember the NHS gave Google a huge amount of data to experiment with, and they only kind of owned up when they got caught. They'd probably still be experimenting with it and working out who to fund and not to fund. And we wouldn't know. That's the thing. If we went and presented ourselves and we were told, oh, the operation's going to take 24 months or something, we wouldn't know. That's because it says basically you're a lazy person who doesn't deserve an operation. Yeah. And that's what the data is. It's going to be predicting the deserving or the undeserving population. And I think that's really, really worrying and politically very, very scary, because it's not even horrifically racist and dodgy politicians saying you're undeserving. It's actually accumulated data over a lifetime saying you do not deserve to live.
What do you think about the government's attitudes towards data? Because I've seen Matt Hancock being like, he wants to hand over as much data as possible. He's like, let Google have it, let all these companies have it and see what they can do to enrich our lives. At the other end of that, you've got something that we've talked about before, very opaque companies who are holding the data. We still have loads of problems with transparency with our own government. Do you think that they don't have our best interests at heart?
Well, I think they have one interest that determines most of what they do, and that's profit. So people are just a source for profit. So whether you're, if you're a high net worth individual, they may align their interests with yours. But if you're not, well, they don't. But we also know that they'll find ways of using you, even if you're not in their kind of top seller, top service group. And that will be to sell you debt and to... As more people now, I think it's 30% of the population are reliant upon debt in order to just survive. We know that that's going to be one of the major financial forces in the future. So they found a way of kind of monetizing the vulnerable populations through selling them debt. So, yeah, I think their interest is profit. Obviously, experimenting with data can be interesting, but we should know that we are being experimented with. But you've always had these two big kind of parallel forces within technology right from the very, very start. Those who think it's pure liberation and those who think it's, going to destroy our lives. And basically, you just need to ask the crucial question, in whose interests? And then you can work out what's going on.
I definitely want to come back and talk about the finance and the debt points that you raised, because we talked about how Facebook was becoming a credit rating agency last year. But you mentioned there that there might be some pluses and some minuses. If technology, surveillance, capitalism comes into the workplace, are there any benefits for the workers? Will we actually see something that will be helpful?
Speechless.
Trying to see if there's any good upsides to it.
I really, really don't know, because everything we've seen has been used to increase productivity or to increase control. So even of highly creative workers, people who are doing writing, for instance, their keystrokes are monitored, their time spent writing a sentence is monitored, their time used on deletion is monitored. So I don't honestly know. I think it's really, really tricky. What we do know is that all these devices have speeded up our lives incredibly. And again, whether that's a good or a bad thing. You know, we can answer 200 emails in a day if we try. So, you know, that's speeded up a huge amount of excessive information. So I don't know what would slow us down. We need to be slowed down.
Good advice. So moving on to, I mean, Amazon would be another example of the finance aspect of technology, and that obviously all these big players are kind of moving into payment systems. Yeah. And Amazon, I think, just last week said that they were looking to offer credit to teenagers and young people who normally wouldn't get access to these sorts of things, and banking the unbanked. Facebook last year, when we spoke to you, you were talking about them using your data as part of a credit rating. Again, this is another subject that it's difficult at the moment to peel people's eyes back to see it. There might be kind of a watershed moment happening with the fact that, oh, you can put lots of stuff together with your data, but this whole other area of payments, because the financial industry is so aggressive, and so has obviously all the money to you know, pursue its interests. Could you perhaps explain to people what sorts of ways your information could be used to make financial decisions about you in the first place?
Well, I think there's just a very, very basic credit rating that happens, where people, it's how much mortgage, how much loan can you get, that kind of thing. But then it kind of gets connected to all your friendship networks. And that's where we've seen with Cambridge Analytica that your friendship networks are more significant than you yourself. So it's who's part of that. So potential becomes very significant here. So say you're a young student, your potential will be rated in terms of what you can get access to, whether you could get a mortgage, whether you could get a loan, whether you can rent somewhere, whether you can get a deposit, all that kind of thing. Anything that involves any finance is going to be based upon your family and your friends. Now, as Cathy O'Neill's shown, if your family and your friends have bad debt ratings, don't have any credit, or on welfare, the chances are you'll be cut off. You may not have some, or you'll be offered the incredibly high percentage payday loan type debt. So that means that at one stage in your life, likely when you're in your early 20s, you will be offered the potential for good debt, mortgages and things like that, or you'll be cut, you'll be offered bad debt, which means you get stuck into what's called stuck in the present. You just keep having to finance that debt to be able to survive. So it's not about, oh, I have a future, I have a house, I have a garden. It's about, I'm stuck and I can't get out of it. So I think there's going to be big differences between people in terms of financial ratings, and they put all the predictive data together, but the key is not just you and your previous spending habits, it's your friends and their spending habits too.
And is that going to be very clear to people how those decisions are made?
No. No, have you ever done a credit rating thing? No.
I've heard that when you do it, it goes down, so I'm waiting until
And it depends on which device you do it on. There was some great research by Joe DeVille at Goldsmiths, and he was looking at debt ratings, and he got us all to experiment. And if you applied for a loan on an iPhone, they gave you a bigger loan but charged you slightly more interest than if you did it on an Android phone. So they were actually looking at the device you were applying on. And we know they do that. We know they do it with surge pricing. We know they do it with airline tickets. So no, there's no transparency at all.
I heard of one instance, it might have been in China, where a woman didn't pay a phone bill, for example. She left the country, she was like, whatever. Through the data that they had, they tracked down the husband and then cut his phone line. So do you I mean, we aren't seeing these things happening, but obviously all this data is being gathered, they're doing all these credit ratings, there's adverts now about your data self. But do you think that's something that we're going to start seeing more of, like the ability of companies to perhaps punish someone else for your debt?
Well, I think people get punished already, not necessarily through finance. We haven't got any evidence yet for finance in the UK, but we know people get punished through predictive policing, which is using similar data sets, to get targeted. So predictive policing just targets vulnerable people in areas of historical deprived areas and just goes for them because they're easier to pick up, and then they fulfil their quotas. So we know that it works in terms of one area of data analysis, so it's likely to work in terms of another. Because they use family and friends. Family and friends become much, much more significant. So it's usually much more about your networks than it is about you as an individual.
Do you think we'll see much more of these companies like Amazon and Facebook being plays in the financial industry, essentially?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In Sweden, I don't know if you saw the story recently about most of the payments happening through privatized banks now because everything's going cashless. Yeah. And Sweden are having this problem where they're like, we actually kind of like our government, but we need them to act on this, and we're not very good at mobilising because we've kind of had it all right for a while. But what are the implications if something cash, which is a public utility, is then turned into a payment system that is governed by lots of private entities?
Oh, I think it's a massive problem, and a lot of these companies have been working on developing financial systems for a long while. I mean, Peter Thiel was the key developer of PayPal. Basically, he wanted to do that because he wanted to deregulate money. So PayPal is a deregulated global money source or money supplier. So he began with that. Facebook developed its messenger service for peer-to-peer transfer of money, again, avoiding traditional banks. And if you watch all they're hilarious, the financial tech disruptors, they're all kind of swaggering in their T-shirts, pretending they're not really kind of bankers. But basically, they're going into the banking market and they're going to deregulate the deregulated sectors even further. And they're going to do it with very, very, very little regulation and very little transparency. And I was having a debate with a man who said, well, everybody has to sign up and agree to have their financial data used. And I was like, yeah, really? It's like you're meant to sign up to, you're meant to sign the privacy statements in Google, Facebook, every app you use, and people don't do it. They just tick it and go because they want the service. So the idea that people are going to check that their financial data is being used is, I think, it's gone. It's happened. So, yeah.
When we did some stories to do with the advancement of the biometric ID system in India, and we spoke to someone out there called Usha Ramanathan, and she was talking about financial inclusion. So the way that they've used it, for example, Amazon will use with these teenagers, they've used it with saying, oh, it's going to be about financial inclusion, right? We're including you, people who have been marginalised. But she said that financial inclusion means financial literacy. So it means that you should understand what it is that you're getting into.
Exactly.
Do you think that's just as big a problem here?
Massive. Well, think about the subprime loan problem that created the financial crash of 2007-8. These people, the bankers literally went out for vulnerable people, those who didn't have bank accounts, those who couldn't get access to loans and couldn't get access to mortgages and had poor housing, and they just targeted them. And the people were signing up. They had no idea they were going to double the fees in a year. They had no idea what they were signing up to. They just thought they were getting their dream. So they were basically the subprime, the financial crisis that we're still living with happened as a result of trying to open out markets to people who'd previously been unreachable. And that's what they're doing now. They're trying to get more into children, they're trying to get more into vulnerable populations, and that's why debt's become much more significant, because it's a big financial service. And I had no idea until I'd read Joe's research that debt companies make a huge amount of money, not just from collecting debts, but from getting people to sign up to agreements. So there's this whole cottage industry, well, it's not a cottage, it's an industry, but, there's this whole sub-products of debt, and it's becoming much, much more significant. So, no, I think people have no idea. I had no idea when I studied these things. So, I don't think people have any understanding, well, they have some, obviously, but how their financial data will be used against them.
And fintech was kind of sold for the last couple of years as being the thing that will solve the problems of the previous banking industry, because we can be transparent, we've got technology, and that's all you need. But I think there's been a couple of pieces in the last few weeks from a judge, for example, who says that it's just as susceptible to fraud and corruption and all these kinds of things. So do you think you've just explained that it's deregulating the industry even more. So do you think it's even more dangerous than the previous?
Much
system?
more dangerous, because think of another big crisis that happened in the financial industry, which was the flash trading one that people still can't explain. You know, the algorithms had a fight or something like that. We don't know what happened. You know, they just dropped, and everybody, you know, all the algorithms jumped in and sold all the money. So it was a crisis. It was resolved quite quickly. But what happens if everything operates on that level, that there's all this data, the data is machine learning data, it's algorithms learning, talking to each other, and we have no idea what's going on. That's not what I call transparency. We know with the financial industry, it attempts to hide nearly everything. We know with all these companies that they attempt to hide nearly everything. I think Amazon, I think somebody tried just like one first shot at Amazon's financial leads, and there were 27 different shell companies before they even got into one of the financial trading ones. So, you know, these are companies that are skilled at hiding stuff. Facebook denied everything until it was exposed. You know, they just hide. They are not known for their transparency. They're known for hiding everything, hiding absolutely everything, so they don't pay tax, so they can get everybody's data, they can do what they like to people. Yeah, no transparency. It's really, really much less regulation.
You talked there about them not paying any tax, so, I mean, I keep using Amazon, but it is really the apex of the examples of everything that this industry is. It pays no federal tax in the US. Essentially, people are starting to understand that we're actually paying out billions for these companies. Because they're not paying any taxes, they're paying low wages, they're bringing down working standards and so on. Coming on to the kind of the subject of the basic income and potentially new structures that we can use in the future, I would suggest that companies like Amazon have essentially, when they've got into government money, they're essentially giving themselves forever money, right?
Exactly.
So they're always going to be able to do this because they're always going to depend on something. So it's nothing to do with a free market kind of thing. It's just going, I'm going to plug myself into something that will give me money forever.
Exactly.
And yet, a basic income is a radical idea for people. Do you think the basic income is a good idea? Do you think it has the power to shift things in a meaningful way against the kinds of monopolies we're seeing right now?
It's a really difficult argument, because again, if you look at the history of basic income, it comes from a far right perspective, which is about taking away any form of welfare. And as you very brilliantly showed in India, it took away all the welfare. So it's a really, really difficult one. As an idea, I'm not sure. Because, on the one hand, it's a very good idea to say that everybody should have equal living wages. Well, not wages, equal income. But most of the predictions over what it should be are really, really low. So the Chris Hughes thing is $500 a month. Who can live on that? The Finnish UBIs it's paid out at the moment, I think, is 500... Is it 500 euros a week?
I can't be sure.
No, we better check that.
It's definitely more than the $500.
It's more, but it's still not very much to live on in Finland. So I haven't seen any figures that actually work on UBI, and I've been looking because I like the idea. But I think it becomes, and it has been used and promoted as just an excuse to withdraw welfare. And I think anything in this current moment that allows welfare to be withdrawn, services to be privatised is really, really problematic. So I think we have to look at it with caution.
Have you got any suggestions or ideas, other than the UBI, that society can do to rebalance the power between the public and companies that have such a hold on our future now?
Well, there's lots of ideas. But I really think what you said earlier is very important, because we as taxpayers are subsidising our own exploitation. We are allowing wages to be brought down. They've been brought down 25% since 1979. We see massive decreases in living standards. And that, I would argue, is partly because the people who should be paying tax, these massive monopolistic corporate companies, are paying nothing. And they're using it to drive down wages. So I think we're in a very difficult time where we have to take on completely non-transparent forces of power that see the state as an ATM. You know, the state just gives them money to privatise everything. And that, for me, is a huge problem. So stop privatising state services. But in order to do that, and in order to provide UBI, you need tax. You have to have tax. You know, now tax is never a good voting policy for many people, unless you live in Scandinavia. But there's so many massive companies that don't pay tax that it's just extraordinary. So we could easily subsidise the welfare state through, you know, Amazon's tax deficit. So that's what needs looking at, the real corporate tax dodgers. But there seems to be absolutely no will to do it because the state uses them or they're kind of, you know, in bed with them in various different ways. So I think it's really problematic, and that's where I would target a lot of attention.